Hello everyone, my name is Alastair. Welcome to our virtual walkabout of our current auction titled Expression, subtitled From Hugo Naudé to Georgina Gratrix. All the works are hanging here in our Johannesburg sale room in Houghton. We are open to the public, so please do come in. The sale is next Tuesday evening, but before then, please do come in and have a look. We have 85 items in the sale, showcasing works over 100 years of South African art making. And the theme, I think, has allowed us to track these incredible aesthetic and stylistic shifts from early Cape Impressionism through to more contemporary Expressionism. These two fabulous works behind me make up our dual cover lot. Is of course a work by Hugo Naudé to my right here, and a fabulous glittering work by Georgina Gratrix produced very recently. These works were painted over a century apart. This one in Port St. John's, and I think the comparison is fascinating and explosive. Yes, Hugo Naudé was an out-and-out impressionist who trained in Europe, who spent a lot of time in Europe, yet a work like this is full of fireworks. It's remarkable to think that this was produced in the early 20th century up near Port St. John's. Fabulous brushwork here, sort of very moody water in the background, and comparing it to a much more recent work by Georgina Gratrix is part of the fun of these smaller curated auctions that we are able to put on. The fabulous work by Georgina Gratrix, whose international reputation is growing all the time, is also a donation. The proceeds of this sale will benefit the KZN Gallery in Durban, so for a very, very good cause too. I love the works on this wall, mainly by contemporary artists, painters, out-and-out painters, which always excites me, certainly more my field or interest or love. Mia Chaplin, Lucy Jane Turpin, Ian Gross, and Kate Godkins, all, as I say, young painters. These are works that in our catalogue you'll notice we've put under broad titles like Intimacy and Instinct. And I think someone like Ian Gross is this, the perfect epitome really of contemporary South African intimist painting. Lovely sort of chalky, thinly painted surfaces, often quite strangely cropped or edited compositions, really giving you a sense of intimacy, being really close up with these two extraordinary figures. We really wanted to make this other comparison between these contemporary painters and Pieter Venning, the forefather really of South African Impressionism. Pieter Venning, born and trained in Holland, came to Pretoria in 1906, painted on the Highveld up until 1917 when he went to the Cape. His patron in the Cape was D.C. Boonzaier, Gregoire's satirist father, and Venning painted in the Cape between 1917 and his premature death in 1921. That little Cape phase that Pieter Venning produced is really quite remarkable. Some of the most important, spectacular paintings in the South African 20th century canon. This Rita case from Mowbray in Cape Town, very dark, atmospheric, jewel-like in its finishing, lovely sort of moments and passages of terracotta. I think he found so much wonder and excitement in all the different varying transient colors. Look at that turquoise, look at that coral color, just flecked where you would least expect it. This is a fabulous painting from 1917, so the year he arrived in Cape Town, and very, very sadly died shortly thereafter. Going on to this fabulous flower wall, all produced by Hugo Naudé, of course. I think important now to be showing them, because I understand the spring flowers in the Macwaland are in full bloom. Hugo Naudé was blown away by these carpets of flowers, and he would visit, I think, annually to paint them. And if he did date all his works, and sadly he didn't, but had he dated them all, I think we'd have a pretty remarkable archive, a visual archive of the flowers during Hugo Naudé's reign. Also an artist that spent a lot of time in Europe, trained at the Slade, also in Germany. He had first-hand experience with a lot of European early 20th century avant-gardes. I think he was very familiar with the Barbizon school, Fontainebleau school, sort of a late realist moving into an impressionist style, and he brings this back to South Africa. He is one of our most important early 20th century landscape painters, one of our most important landscape painters, period. I think a lot of us have got used to his pictures because he was prolific, and we see them regularly. They come up at auction all the time. But when you really spend some time looking at these individual works, you'll get a sense of just how brilliant a painter Hugo Naudé was. Based in Worcester for most of his life, but would travel around the country, particularly in Namaqualand, of course, painting these fabulous Cape Impressionist scenes. I absolutely love this example with these boulders on the left and the right-hand side of the composition, very sort of fluid, milky strokes, and then the more typical Impressionist style, shorter, flashing, dashing brushstrokes of green and orange, purple, sort of making up this fabulous carpet of flowers. Having a whole lot of them together, I think rams home just how exceptional a painter he was. Also working on different scales. These smaller works like this would have had a practical background. These smaller panels he would have used to paint on plein air. He would have been out in the field painting essentially what was in front of him, and that's always extra special. What do we have going further down? Fabulous painting by Irma Stern of Emanzim Toti from 1936, a gouache work showing all her fluidity, all her elements of expressionism. I think Irma Stern maybe stands as the center point, this almost transformation point between South African early Cape Impressionism and a latter-day Expressionism. She, of course, trained in the German Expressionist mold, having spent time in Germany and again experiencing those artists and those styles firsthand, and allowing her to paint on her travels remarkable flash-like paintings like the one I'm showing you here. Amazing painting by Irma Stern of Emanzim Toti, still wonderfully fresh, 90-odd years old, and the color is so beautifully strong, might have been painted yesterday. Lovely gouache by Peter Clark from 1966, a landscape of the Donga, sort of fascinating abstract elements in the bottom register, and these two sort of moody shadow-like figures, as is so often the case with Peter Clark, walking off into the distance. Another work above it by Peter Venning. Wow, it's so hard for me to pick a favorite, but this is definitely one of them. This is a crazily painted avant-garde picture. Again, painted in the Cape before he died in 1921, so over 100 years old. And if you look at some of the passages of painting here, it is remarkable to think that he could paint like this at that time. There was simply nobody in the Cape painting anywhere close to this. All this fabulous calligraphic markings, all these strange combinations of color. Look at that sort of flash of electric blue, mustards, yellows, reds, coppers, peaches, all in this very small section, seen from a higher vantage point, and then having the audacity almost to put this sort of ghostly sheep or goat standing at the entrance of this Malay Quarter home. Really quite a remarkable painting. As is this, painted much later, but still in Cape Town, a fabulous, large-scale, exuberant painting by Elahi. Elahi, not a household name, although when you look at a picture like this, you wonder why on earth not. Look at this fabulous orange snaking road from Table Mountain towards Signal Hill, this crazy combination of impressionistic, haze-like city view. And again, if you look up close, it's amazing to think of the colors she's used. turquoise, pinks, oranges, reds, moving into mustards and greens. And if you look at it very close up, it almost doesn't make any sense. And of course, that's always one of the beautiful characteristics of Impressionist pictures, that as you move further away and as you see the whole composition, you get a sense of this fabulous impression of a scene. Amazing painting, large scale, very, very attractively priced at 10 to 15,000 Rand. There should be a zero on the end of this, in my opinion. Staying in the Cape and staying on Table Mountain, this is a very, very unusual painting by Henk Pierneef. It shows Table Mountain from the sort of non-tourist viewpoint, the viewpoint that we're not used to seeing, with this lovely little sort of vernacular architectural element in the midground. It's an out-and-out Impressionist painting by Henk Pierneef. Now, we don't associate Pierneef with Impressionism. When we think about Pierneef, we think about his linearity, his very clear organization, his various geometric harmonies in the way he puts his pictures together. But he was a fabulous Impressionist painter. You need to remember that early on in his career, his sort of early mentors were artists like Peter Venning, Anton van Vaux, George Smithard, artists that he would spend a lot of time with out in the veld, on the high veld, painting on plein air, painting what was in front of him in a moment, in a flash. And this is part of that earlier tradition, that earlier training. It has these wonderful colors, lilacs and purples, and this very gentle cloudburst coming off Table Mountain. It's also more obviously a reference to his station panels that he produced for the Johannesburg railway station between 1929 and 1932. The main work he did at 1.6 by 1.6 meters of Table Mountain is almost this exact view, of course, in his more linear, clear style. It's a fabulous painting. You also need to remember that Pierneef made a very important trip to Europe in 1925, returning early in 1926. And he was moved by so many guises of modernism, one of which being out-and-out divisionism, which I suppose is a later manifestation of Impressionism and Pointillism. Think of artists like Seurat, for instance. He was very interested in that scientific element of capturing light, sort of advocated by the divisionists. And the work he produced, or sections of the work he produced after his return in 1926, is dedicated to this experimentation around divisionism. And frankly, those are some of his most remarkable paintings. And I would put that very loosely in that category. Fabulous, small, jewel-like painting by J.H. Pierneef. I can't talk about every painting, so I've got to try and select them as I can. But fabulous work by Gordon Foster. Probably my favorite artist at the moment, incredibly underappreciated and therefore undervalued. We put this work, I think, under a broad title of instinct, which is maybe a description that is linked to Expressionism. But look at the way he's produced these fleck-like tree branches, these winter branches at the top of the composition. A very abstract painter was Gordon Foster, and ahead of his time in so many ways, and never gets the credit he deserves. This work of District 6, Tennant Street by Gregoire Boonzaier, I suppose is an out-and-out classic Cape Impressionist picture. It shows District 6 in 1963, which is important because it does, of course, predate the area's destruction. It's a very moving, moody kind of a painting, historically very, very weighty for obvious reasons. I love the flaking facades of these buildings, an element of age, an element of patina that he captures so wonderfully. At the same time, there's a sense of daily life going ahead, going on, the little car parked under these telephone poles, these figures sort of moving through the streets. And then, of course, Gregoire being Gregoire surprises us with these sort of bravura, flashy inclusions, that bit of blue over there, this teal green that he just picks up on the gutter and the top here, and then in the background, the fabulous bright turquoise of the bay with the cranes visible there too. Very important work, the kind of work that you'd see in the National Gallery. Other fabulous works by Gerard Sokoto, sort of township scene. Again, we put it under this broad title of Instinct. And again, we love the comparison between this painting and this Gordon Foster work. And of course, they couldn't be any more different in terms of their backgrounds, but stylistically, these two works certainly resonate. One of the best Piet van Heerden's I think I've ever seen. Again, an example that shows just what a quality painter he was. This lovely kokerboom on the right-hand side of the composition. I think borrowing compositionally from someone like Pierre Neef, using these sky-reaching trees to sort of organize a composition that relied on a very extensive landscape. But again, these lavenders and pinks of these far mountains remind me a hell of a lot of Pierre Neef himself. And moving to out-and-out contemporary pictures, the Lucy Jane Turpin, this figural abstract work, which again is absolutely one of my favorites. It's frankly a mesmerizing canvas. I could spend hours in front of it. And yes, of course, you see this figural couple that kind of dominates the composition. But to me, the painting is more about texture and about sensation. And if you look closely, the way the oil is applied on this very sort of heavy weave canvas is remarkable. In some sections, it's almost reptilian. In the sort of scale-like way the paint is applied. But it's also very luxurious, these very surprising contrasting colors. It's an imposing work. Wilhelm was talking about it yesterday and talking about the artist's residencies in North Africa, I think in Morocco specifically, where I think she most likely would have been influenced by tapestries and woven items. And I think there's definitely an element of that in a work like this, a very luxurious overall canvas. Fabulous, fabulous work. And look at that flash of blue. What you might imagine is that one figure's hair, and these sort of sunshine yellow rays on the bum too. Pretty wild works by Kylie Wenzel, sort of I think inspired by sort of lino cuts as well as sort of advertising, sort of vernacular African sort of street scenes that you might see up and down the continent. An amazing work by Alexander Rosinus, who's maybe an artist better known for his sort of moody interiors, an artist we would maybe put into that second generation of Cape Impressionists, alongside artists like Gregoire Boonzaier, sort of working around that new group period from the late 1930s through into the mid-century. But this is a really fantastic still life. With the sort of sugar cubes in the foreground, the teaspoon still in this cup, and this fabulous kind of coppery element on the rim. Noel Hodnett, Eastern Cape painter, a painter we see very few examples from, very, very sadly, but one of my favorite painters, sort of very expressionistic in the way paint is applied, very unusual, I think a very brave kind of a painter. Who on earth would have thought they should do a very, very sort of darkly forested hillock, with a cloud burst in the background and these very sort of strange foliage elements in the foreground with, highlights of mustard and cream and electric reds. A very strange, as I say, brave kind of a painting, but it works so beautifully. I love this work. A little triple hang over here, which I think is also a fabulous combination. Paul de Toy in the center, Walter Voigt on the bottom, and then Terence McCaw on the top. This work from the 1950s. And I think if you were to think about out-and-out Impressionism, think of the Monets of the world, I think this kind of a painting sums up that kind of spirit, maybe more than most of the other works on this sale. This fabulous watered reflection of the reeds in this body of water or this river, the near bank here, or even lilies maybe in the bottom section, and these incredible reflections that Terence McCaw is able to capture. Terence McCaw is another artist who is scandalously underappreciated. He was a very important painter, a very accomplished painter, and to think that a work like this is pitched at 15 to 20,000 Rand, well, it's frankly ridiculous. This is an incredible painting, and hopefully it'll generate lots of interest. Paul du Toit, an abstract landscape painter. We always love seeing them here because generally there are more of them in the Cape, so we don't see as many of them as you would like to up here in our Johannesburg sale rooms. And Walter Voigt, of course, coming from a great family of painters. Adolf Jensch, one of my favorite landscape painters, and we're able to make a really interesting comparison between this work here and this very small out-and-out impressionist work of Moritzburg, both by Adolf Jensch. Now, I think a lot of you will know Jensch's story. Grew up in Dresden, trained in Dresden. He was rubbing shoulders with artists that would really build the foundations of out-and-out German Expressionism, artists like Max Pechstein, for instance. He was seeing these wild, crazy, experimental artists firsthand, yet he remained stylistically rather untouched, quite conservative still in the way he painted. And this is a fantastic example of Moritzburg. This probably would have been done, I guess, sometime in the 1920s or early 1930s. As the sort of Nazi net closed around all the cultural institutions in Germany in the mid-1930s, artists like Adolf Jensch, or many of them, had no option in their mind but to leave. And Adolf Jensch, as I think a lot of people know, ended up in the then Southwest Africa in 1938. He was blown away by these vast, endless landscapes, these mirage-like scenes, these perfect clear skies, this very spiritual element to this very alien landscape for him. You know, he was used to seeing these kind of canals and waterways and very green European scenes, and he was repositioned in this incredible landscape. And he never returned to Europe. He spent the rest of his life painting his beloved Namibian landscape. And this work from 1938 would have been one of the early works he produced shortly after his arrival. I used the word spiritual, and yes, Jensch approached his landscape painting in a very spiritual way. I think very much influenced by Eastern religions, and of course by Chinese art. And if you look at works like this, it's very calligraphic in the mark making, these lovely little flecks and specks, particularly in the actual ground that you see here. Fabulous works. His large-scale oils are rare, and that is because, sadly, the majority of them were lost in a fire in the mid-1970s. So to have a large-scale oil like this is always very special. Moving around, fabulous abstract works by Ian McCundle, one of my favorite contemporary artists, as well as Micah Bucker. We wanted to show them together, not only because of their obvious similarities, but also to make the comparison in terms of mark making to an artist like Adolf Jensch and, of course, Irma Stern. This, one of the anchor lots in the sale, Bathers in Cannes in 1965. This is, I would argue, a late career masterpiece. It's painted in 1965. She, of course, died in 1966, so a very late career painting. But it has everything you'd want from a Stern. These fabulous gestural markings, particularly when you look, say, in the skyscape and the clouds. But you see a real sense of confidence in the way this is painted. Look at the mast in that ship. It's done almost in one swipe. Sort of amazing confidence at this point in her career. Wilhelm writes about this in our catalogue, wonderful sort of story. She had exhibited in Paris, I think in the January of 1965, And I think her and her friend were, I think, on their way to Alicante in Spain on a painting trip, but she fell ill and they ended up spending a few months in Cannes, which is when this painting would have been executed. Of course, a rather unusual trio of figures here, nude, of course, linking back to the Muses. So there's definitely a classical, an antique reference here. But you get a sense of fabulous sunshine and exuberance in a painting like this. It's in fantastic condition. She was using a tighter weave canvas at the time, and again, talking about confidence, very happy to leave some of the plain elements of the canvas showing, used not only as highlights, but also, I think, building an overall impression of an expressionist moment. Fabulous painting, this. Lovely works by Christo Couture, Roses in a Vase, as well as more contemporary works, a lovely cityscape, an out-and-out expressionist painting by David Kolani at the top here. I know I'm really droning on, so I will try and wrap it up quickly. This is one of my favorite Gregoires in the sale. In a work like this, which is from 1953, with that fabulous hillside of trees there, you get a sense of just how moved he was always by Cézanne, not only in palette, but of course in composition and the way the painting is structured alongside sort of rudimentary geometric elements. Here's another impressionist picture by Pyreneef. This is a Bourland farm. Again, doesn't require too much explanation in terms of it falling under a broad impressionist banner. But if you look at the brush strokes close up, sort of small, short, deliberate strokes in orange and green, and of course the ubiquitous lilacs and blues that come to define so many of Pyreneef's landscapes. More works by Conrad Thijs and Gregoire Boonzaier. Conrad Thijs really picking up the baton from someone like Gregoire. Born in 1940, which is interesting because he would have been born a few months before Hugo Naudé passed away in 1941. So that continuum of Cape Impressionism moving through from Hugo Naudé to Gregoire and through to Conrad Thijs. Lovely small-scale works by Frans Oerda. Again, you can't really think about this picture without recalling Monet's Haystacks in winter specifically, but a lovely small-scale work by Helen Sabidi, very gestural in the marking, sort of scummed kind of a surface, but a really lovely jewel-like painting. As are these two, Cecil Higgs, this impression of fire, which I think is so remarkable because she's painted them in blues, cool, dark colors with just these little elements of orange in the center. Zach Eloff, another incredibly underappreciated painter, and I think one of the reasons why we love doing these kind of smaller curated sales is to give artists like Zach Eloff a bit more of a platform, and again to show the market what a fantastic painter he was. Of course, we all think about him as a wildlife painter, but if you think just purely stylistically, how a work like this falls under, as I say, a broadly impressionist banner. This is a fabulous impressionist picture. It happens to be of 3 kudu bulls, so a far cry from Monet's water lilies, but palette-wise, surprisingly similar. Look at these blues and greens and purples and lilacs, a sense of reflection in a work like this, even though it's an out-and-out springtime bushveld painting. Fabulous work by Zaki Eloff. I think I will pretty much end there. Another work by Gregoire of Genadendal, Terence McCaw. I told you earlier how underappreciated he is. Johannes Meintjes' portrait, a Pieta by Walter Battis. Again, fabulous works by Conrad Thijs, Alexander Rosinus, and David Botha, another out-and-out Cape Impressionist with these sort of moody, rainy winter paintings, particularly around the Stellenbosch area. I think I will end there. But just to reiterate that the sale is on Tuesday evening. Our interactive e-catalog is on our website. Please go through it. And as I mentioned right at the start, please come and have a look at the show if you can. We're open on Saturday morning and then of course on Monday and Tuesday, with the sale starting at 6 p.m. on Tuesday evening. It'll be streamed live on our website, and there are a number of ways to bid. You can leave a commission bid, an absentee bid, you can register to bid on the telephone. Of course, you can bid real time, live on our website as the hammer falls. Thank you very much.